I want to talk a little bit about the C word today, certainty. So, as you know, I talk about that often, but a particular instance that came up recently that I found interesting as I was kind of reflecting on it. I signed up for a bunch of like daily newsletters that send daily write-ups and information. Sometimes it's news, sometimes it's thoughts on different topics, but there's one that I think Ryan Holiday does it, the Daily Dad. So it's kind of like a stoicism, parenting dad advice. And he sent out one yesterday, the day before, about as a parent, as a dad, what you're going to tell your kids or your grandkids about how you handled the COVID pandemic. And sometimes he writes them in ways that are pretty opinionated, have a degree of certainty to them, for sure, maybe a lot of certainty. And this was one of those where he was pretty vocal and opinionated about, if you tell your kids or your grandkids 20 years from now that you still went out to restaurants, or you still saw family, or you still, went to stores or did things, you're going to be, I think he used some strong language. I think he said, whether you be a moron or something that was relatively insulting. And again, a pretty certain view that unless you are totally following every rule, that to the extent the rules are inconsistent that the government's giving you, you're doing it wrong, and that you're going to regret it, and that you're going to look foolish when you tell your kids. And more or less, in the spirit of the newsletter, you're not being a good dad. Now, let me say, the topic I want to cover on this is my reaction to it. What I've just said in the last minute or so is already interesting and relevant to that. You can hear, I'm sure, through the tone of my voice and the way I'm explaining this and the way I'm describing it, there's bias in it. There's identity issues coming to play. There's all sorts of things, right? I'm not repeating it verbatim. So the way I'm repeating it, the things I'm choosing to emphasize, the things that I'm simplifying, sacrificing truth to simplify, are all evident of my reaction to this post or this email. And I say that because it's an interesting instance of running into certainty, right? I talked in a prior video about how I've tried to evolve my view of interacting with somebody else who is certain, whereas it used to make me angry and offended, that kind of transition to more like pity, like I believe you think you're certain, and that's sad for you that you believe that, to ultimately more empathy and saying like, I believe you're certain, right? And you may be, and you may be right, but let's just kind of talk about it and test it. What's interesting about this situation is that I seem to have forgotten that. When I was reading that newsletter, I was much more in that first camp, that first bucket, like, how fucking dare you tell me that? Like, you don't know my situation. You don't know what I'm doing or why I'm doing it. And who are you to say that's exactly the rules that should be followed? All the things, right? All the reactions to certainty that I historically would have had. And what I realized was that it's one thing to deal with certainty conceptually. It's one thing to deal with certainty when it's not about something that you have a stake in, right? That you're invested in some way. It's a whole other thing to interact and face certainty when it goes counter to something that you either deeply believe or a decision that you've already made. And for me, that's more the category of this one, right? I try not to have too many deeply, deeply held beliefs where I get offended if somebody challenges it. But this was a decision I've already made, right? We've been living through this pandemic, and I've gone to stores. I've gone out to restaurants and sat outside. I've seen certain people following the right protocols, right? Wearing the mask, distancing, etc. So he was now challenging a decision I've made with certainty. And I can recognize now in this video, intellectually, conceptually, as I talk about it, that I should have handled it the same way, right? The truth is the truth, whether I admit it or not, right? I'm getting angry because it's possible the things he is saying are true, and they're inconvenient truths for me now. I've been doing it wrong. Maybe I've been a bad parent. Maybe I've been a bad person, whatever it is. I'm angry at the idea that that may be true and that he's put that in front of me. So I'm lashing out, right? My subconscious, all different things are protecting myself. I don't like it. I'm fighting back against it. But that's wrong, right? That's illogical. Big L, illogical. The reaction should be, that's an interesting viewpoint. He seems very certain about it. I believe he believes he's certain. Let's check. Let's test, right? Because I'd rather know the truth if that's the case. So let me look at this, very analytically. But easier said than done. And much easier said than done when it comes to something you are invested in, you have a stake in. So for me, it's a reminder that, practice what you preach, but practice what you preach when it matters. And it goes back to an old concept I've talked about. It's easy when it's easy, it's hard when it's hard. It's easy to handle certainty and interact with it the right way when it's easy, when it's not something that matters that much to you. But it's fucking hard to deal with certainty when it goes directly counter to something that you believe or have made a decision on. And that's the time when it matters most. That's the time where if you actually want to make a difference, whatever it is, right? Have better communication with somebody, have better reflection for yourself, just get to a better outcome, have better perspective, be more objective. That's the time when it's hard dealing with certainty that you really have to step up and try and do it the right way.